Welcome to the Marmalade Partner Webinar Series. I'm Steph Jorgel, Head of Americas for Marmalade, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. The Marmalade Partner Webinar Series is designed to share thought leadership, trends, and tips around the services and integrations that work with the Marmalade cross-platform development SDK and features partners Flurry, Fortumo, HasOffers, PaymentWall, GameHouse, and others. We'll start off with 45 minutes of presentation, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Feel free to post your questions during the presentation in the lower left part of the screen. We'll address these questions just following the presentation. Today's guest speaker is Richard Firminger, Managing Director with Flurry, who's going to share with you a global gaming update on the state of mobile gaming advertising and analytics and a forecast into what's likely to happen in 2014 and beyond. Richard?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Steph and Marmalade, for inviting me to give you some insights as Flurry sees it. So I'll just get straight in. Got a ton of stuff to show you. So we see an awful lot, which gives us sort of a unique insight into the world of the app economy. So just a heads up, what I'm talking about today is mobile, it's smart devices, and it's in-app. We don't track mobile web. We don't track on any other platform. So everything you're going to hear about in the next 45 minutes is around the app economy, and specifically later on the deck around what's affecting games as well. So we do see an awful lot, which gives me hopefully an educated position to talk to you about some of the trends we see, which puts us in a very different position from the likes of a Comscore or Forrester, which is taking a sample and extrapolating out to a wider community. This is actual data. So we see over 1.3 billion active monthly devices. We think we see around 90% of all devices, and we see around 5 billion app sessions around the world each day, and about 7 to 10 apps per device. So we give away free analytics. We do so for a whole bunch of developers, really big ones, really small ones, and everyone in between. It's about 490,000 apps that we provide our free analytics SDK. Major app developers around the world like Angry Birds, Cut the Rope, Talking Tom, Fruit Ninja, and then Subway, Surfers, Snapchat, The Guardian, Pinterest, Tumblr, and the list goes on. So it's very difficult actually to have a device and not download at least one app that has our software in it. So that puts us in an advantaged position with regard to our penetration. We have, strange position, but we have more penetration than anyone else on the planet, more than Facebook, more than Google, and anyone else that claims a significant size and reach. Business model is around analytics and advertising. We turn the data that we see on an insight into hopefully accelerated revenue and growth opportunities for developers through advertising and more effective advertising for brands and marketers. Our ambition is not to have developers advertising to other developers, but to have developers behaving like media owners and using their audiences to really attract the major brand advertisers around the world, be that Coca-Cola, McDonald's, or Procter & Gamble. That really is our intention. We do it through our platform AppSpot, and we have an ad network called AppCircle, which is principally for video, banners, and takeovers. And we use the data to target more effectively so that publishers can leverage each and every user from the data that we have to be more valuable to the ecosystem and to advertisers. So that's who we are. That's what we do. So I'll move straight in. So here's a quick look at the advertising business and the mobile advertising business relative to all digital. You can see that it's growing and growing fast. Last year, the mobile ad business was generally regarded to be worth about 17 billion, of which about 4 billion was display. But you can see it's quickly accelerating, and according to marketers, the value of mobile advertising is going to really explode. In a couple of years, it's going to be worth just over 37 billion. And if we keep the same ratio, then display advertising is going to be worth around 9.5, 10 billion. So game developers that I'm talking to today, if you're in the freemium business and you're only really concentrating on your whales that are generating revenue through in-app purchase, or indeed in the premium model, you are missing out on an incredibly fast-growing sector from advertising. So in terms of app usage, we saw that on average, all apps grew at an average of 115%. And kind of echo Ben Evans's update when he described the mobile eating the world. We can't really help but agree. We think that the apps are disrupting almost every sector, almost every industry, almost every vertical, be that the film business, the music business, the messaging business, the games business, the way in which we shop, the way in which we look at services, utilities, tools, productivity. Apps are pretty much disrupting every single market. And obviously games is one of the most mature. So that 66% you can see out on the right, that 66% growth in usage inside games year on year, we think is still an amazing result given how long mobile games have been available for users to play with and engage with. But obviously there are other sectors that are growing at an incredibly fast rate. It's unsurprising that the messaging social is an incredibly hot sector. We've obviously seen recent significant acquisitions with Facebook and WhatsApp, but also with Line, with Kakao, and with WeChat. Interesting data around WeChat. It sold 150,000 new Xiaomi devices in 10 minutes. Incredibly powerful tools that can open up almost entirely new distribution channels for games developers looking to acquire new users, looking to acquire new spenders. So we're seeing significant growth, and it's extremely exciting. We're also seeing what we call almost a new explosion in the number of apps being produced around the world. And you can see that, 18 months ago, we thought that the app market was just going crazy. We saw just under 20,000 new apps being created with Flurry in a quarter. And then you come out to sort of Q3 of last year, and actually we saw just over 35,000, almost doubling the number of new apps. And so therefore we kind of called it a new content app explosion. There's more choice than ever before. There's more choice outside the US than ever before. And that growth is coming across all sectors and including games. And so now we have, well over 1 million apps, unique apps for users and consumers to choose from, and therefore competition and discovery and how you acquire users and how you retain users are often the really big things that developers are concerned about. Good news is that Europe's in great health. I sit in London today, and we're obviously seeing some amazing success with companies like King and Supercell, and indeed Gameloft, and Skype's an original player in the marketplace, and Zeptolab and Outfit 7 and Wooga and Kulu. So out here in Europe, we're really excited by the sheer innovation and success that's being achieved in the European market. And there's plenty of white space. We often talk about, Facebook dominating app content and app consumption. And I think it's generally regarded about a quarter of the time we spend consuming content inside apps is on Facebook. But what this actually shows you is the number of apps that we see that have an audience of over 20 million MAU. You can get depressed on one level and think, well, it's only 32, but that's actually, it's grown nearly 360% on a compound annual basis since Q1 2002. So back 18 months ago, there were only 7 apps that we looked at that we tracked that were achieving that level of scale. So the number of apps that are now generating over 20 million monthly MAU is 32, which is incredible growth, and I think it shows that consumers want to consume apps like never before. Their appetite is certainly not satiated. And if you actually drop down to how many app developers are achieving an audience of over 1 million monthly active users, that's grown too. That's grown from just under 400 to just over 850. Again, that's a 121% increase. As a percentage of overall number of apps, it's obviously still very small. I mean, we think we track about, by number, about half the apps in the world. It's about 500,000 apps that we track. But out there, amongst the 1.3 billion active consumers out there, we definitely, developers are finding millions of people that enjoy apps and the content behind it. And so we're seeing, just if you soaked up the general trends there from Flurry seeing, we're seeing faster growth, more choice, more consumption, more large audiences, and we think that shows significant health for the app economy, which we're very excited about. The other thing is that for the first time last year, we saw more active apps developed outside the US than inside the US, and often we get over-focused on thinking that North America dominates the app developer market, and obviously it's still very strong. We're talking about, last year, just 36% of apps actually created inside the US as a percent of active apps around the world. But actually, I think it's really exciting that there's more apps being developed outside the US, and that shows the international communities are increasingly generating apps that have activity. And we see that's a significant sign of health. However, if you look at it from a more granular level and more local level, some really intriguing things here. Maybe unsurprising, but slightly surprising. I'm just going to pick out a couple of examples here. So if you look at the UK, only 13%, the red block in the middle, of apps that Brits consume were actually made in the UK. So there's a huge international appetite. 87% of apps, the time spent in apps, is actually produced by countries other than the UK. Actually, if you then flip out to China, the almost exact opposite is true. 64% of apps consumed by Chinese are built and made in China. But certainly, at one level, it's obvious that that China is a difficult market to get into, but it does show an enormous potential if you spend some time working on culturalization. I'm just going to explore what I think it takes to be successful locally. And I was on a panel at Mobile World TV Live last week in Barcelona, and I talked about the HSBC phrase "thinking global but acting local" and what it means to develop success for games in the local market. And I used an example of zombies. You can't use the same zombie look and feel around the world. You have to adapt it to different features and different looks in each of those markets. But also, it's worth thinking about having an in-market local team. A market outside China probably won't be able to crack China as well as one inside. And that local market can localize language, obviously, and really work hard at cultural look and feel to make sure your app functionality and your game functionality and your gameplay is the same, but the look and feel is working very hard to be local. Even having a company website in Chinese, driving local promotion, having a local customer support team, doing user acquisition in the local market, using marketing to highlight the fact that your app is local, responding to user reviews on Google Play, for example, in real time and in the local language from someone inside that market. And then obviously when you come to promote in the App Store, thinking about your App Store listing, your title descriptions, your content and your ad creatives, and making sure they're really working as hard as possible to be as tuned to the local market as possible. And here's a major opportunity. We report later on in the deck that China is the largest active smart device market in the world. It became so at February of last year. It overtook the US. And in relative population terms, the US is 360 million people, whereas China's, I think, 1.3 billion, and therefore it's very likely, or it's guaranteed that China remains the most active smartphone market in the world forevermore. So it's a market that's worth working on, but localization is absolutely key. Just a quick look at what happened at Christmas, because we've been observing Christmas now for many a year. Flurry's been providing analytics for over 5 years, but we're definitely seeing Christmas being different this last year than any other year. And here's a few examples. It's not on this slide, but we saw the year-on-year increase on Christmas Day relative to the average days in December 2013 on 12 was a growth of 90%. However, 2013 on 12 was actually only 11%. So there's a very definite slowdown in the Christmas effect. And that's probably at one simple level is that fewer new folks are coming online and activating devices at Christmas than there have been previously. Most households have got multiple smart devices, multiple phones, multiple tablets, certainly in the Western world. And therefore, what we're seeing here is Christmas Day behaving often like a weekend. It's almost what we're doing when we're relaxing. And what we can see, for example, on this slide is that games and social apps were downloaded 2 times the rate they were on a typical day in December. So we're definitely seeing some increases, but I would actually counsel everyone to look at Christmas more like, it's indicative of what people do just on their days off rather than specifically around Christmas. Other categories that obviously do grow in their downloads over Christmas are media, so photos, music, video, lifestyle, so sports, book, magazines, and entertainment. So again, you can see that there is still a significant uptick. There is still a surge in downloads for the games market, but we're definitely seeing a market maturation and a slowdown in the sheer number of new devices that are coming on. We also produce, as a side note, we produce some data around which device actually won the Christmas war in 2013, and it in fact was the Amazon Kindle Fire, and we think that's for a whole number of reasons. Amazon is a big shopping destination over Christmas, so it's got a very, very large portal to promote its hardware on. The device is obviously priced at a point that's extremely affordable. It's a plug-and-play kit, so and obviously the form factor is extremely attractive. So if you want to see more on what happened at Christmas, if you go to the Flurry blog, flurry.blog.com, you'll see a lot of these slides and more. So I hope you're finding this useful. I can see questions coming in, but I'll keep pressing ahead. I think we have about 20 minutes left. So often look at this slide. This is from 5 a.m. to 4 a.m. This looks at the 24-hour usage pattern. It looks at it across each of the categories. Very similar patterns across all of the categories. And we're seeing sort of, the surge in app time, really starting at 7 a.m. and not really declining in its growth until 9 or 10. Very different behavior between phones and tablets. Very different time spent and session lengths between categories, genres, and tablets. And here's a few examples. Obviously, in our phone, we're snacking. The games that we play are faster. The session lengths are much shorter, but they're highly frequent. Whereas actually in the evening, we will have far greater dwell time on, bubble tree matches, sim games, RPG. But games dominates the evening. Games and tablets almost behave like daytime, evening peak time TV. The real surge in tablet usage is between 7 and 11 in the evening. And actually after 11, the phone takes back over, as maybe we're still mobile for those that are night owls or coming back from shifts, or indeed you've actually, you've gone to bed, but you're still on your phone. And actually the other thing to note is that tablets and TV are very much connected these days. And we often get asked when the mobile TV is going to arrive. And we really think it's already here. It's called the tablet. It's the TV device of choice for teenagers. They get to watch what they want, when they want, in the room that they want. So teenagers would much rather consume content, video on demand, non-linear TV in their bedroom than in the living room with their parents. So we think that there's a dramatic change in how we're consuming TV as well. So starting to have a look at retention, this is one of our most recent blogs, looking at average retention, and we're talking about a concept of half a life. So this is where there's been, whereas the number of users that are active at less than 50% after a certain period. And as shown in the chart, the decay is fairly rapid in the first few months after post-peak. A quarter of all apps fall below half their peak of MAU in the month after peaking. So if you see the top chart in the orange band, that percentage grows to 43% in the second month post-peak. And then the third month, the post-peak, just over 52% of apps fall below half their peak of MAU. And then obviously there's the fourth month and beyond, the decay in your loss of users declines over time. And actually the significant challenge with retention rates in sector is demonstrated by the next slide, which is the median number of months it takes after peak to lose at least half your audience. And you can see the struggle there on the games sector, which is that it only takes on average 2 months after the peak for the games sector to lose at least half its audience. We had produced some older slides, which also shows that on average in the game sector, after 12 months across all apps, on average, they've lost 96% of their users. It's a depressing number. That means that on average, almost all games lose almost all of their users in the first 12 months. And obviously there's a range of performance and there's a range of success and there's a range of retention. And obviously if you've generated a peak MAU of 10,000 plus or under 10,000, so if you've started to gain some critical success and you started to get some virality and started to get people downloading you organically as you rise in the charts, then there's a very different set of behaviors and likely success once you get over 10,000 MAU. So you can see that it takes on average 5 months once you've received a peak of at least 10,000 MAU relative to 3 months under 10,000. I guess success begets success is probably what we're talking about here. So a real challenge for the games market to retain users, a real challenge to really think about, I want to launch an app, I want to get it in the store, I'm really focused on the chart position, but actually once you start to develop a user base, it's actually then how do you retain them? What is it you do and change and develop in terms of hooks and other things to keep games players interested and loyal and opening your app rather than others. In terms of platforms and devices, Android now maintains a slight lead. It's the first time we saw Android overtake Apple was in 2012, and it's about balance, and Android's increasingly coming all around the Samsung world. A third of all Android activity is witnessed on Samsung. And we've got some other slides on how that looks in other markets. So having a look at, the top 10 global gaming markets. So this is looking at devices that have engaged in at least one session on a games app and looking at the relative sessions on both active devices rather on Android versus iOS. And we can see some significant, differences in loyalty to the two main operating systems on Android and iOS. And Android and iOS, by the way, combined, we think is around 90% of everything that we should worry about, either downloads or app sessions. We think, well over 90% are generated from those two. So you can see in China, the Android market is responsible for around 146 million active devices. In the US, it's a switch. So only 93 million active devices are on Android in the US. Actually, you can see comparative there across all the major markets. The UK has the greatest loyalty to iOS relative to Android at 66%. If you then have a look at the top European markets, again, as you're thinking about, okay, I'm looking to break into Europe, I'm looking to break into the top European gaming markets. Should I develop on iOS? Should I develop on Android? Which do I prioritize and which platform should I work on first? So if you're looking to break into the UK market, if you're not thinking iOS first, then you're going to struggle because only a third of active devices are actually Android devices. The same goes for France. The same goes for Sweden, Switzerland, and Denmark. However, if you're looking to really focus on Android first, then the best markets to do that are Germany, are Spain, are Italy, and indeed Poland. But obviously the size of these markets are extremely important too. We often talk to some developers who are, for example, big Android developers, but looking to a relatively small market to test and to see what the appetite is for the new game. Some great examples of markets there would be markets like Poland and Ukraine and Austria, because they're relatively small. They're less costly to break into those chart positions with promotion, PR, and user acquisition strategies. But you should get a lot of testing, a lot of learning from those smaller markets where there's less at stake. You iron out the wrinkles, you test in those markets before you go to some of the bigger markets. And then if we look at the Asian market, unsurprisingly, it's all dominated pretty much by Android. You suddenly see a huge slew of green, across, some of these markets are almost entirely Android markets, Japan being the exception. We look at South Korea, India, Russia, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia. They're all heavily, heavily dominated by Android in a way that you just don't see in Western Europe and North America. So again, if you're looking to break into the Android market, this does exclude China. But if you're looking to break into the Android market, then the Asian market, then you really have to think Android first. So moving on. So again, some insight in where we see what the sort of tipping point is, and the number of devices that you need to test for, the number of devices you need to design for, the number of devices that generate the vast majority of total actives. So you can see that around just under 160 devices generate just over 80% of all active devices. And this kind of helps you understand, how to test devices and what software you need to use, and whether emulators are good, but are they 100% reliable, and outsourcing to companies like UTest or Testology or iBeta or Animoca and test on. I think they test on over 400 devices internally due to a fragmented Asian market where the sheer number of devices is much larger than in other markets. We hear some other developers like Pocket Gems testing around 40 devices, Stormate testing around 50 devices. So, but only testing on a handful of devices really puts you at risk once your games are out in the wild, that you fully tested and you've fully seen the experience, and feeding that back into the test cycle before you go live into the wild. And increasingly, the price of apps is free on iOS. We've been sort of monitoring this over the last 4 years. And last year was a fairly seismic shift in the number of apps in the stores that are in fact free. And there's a common held belief that consumers hate seeing ads on smart devices. And we may be partly right there. I think ads are kind of, accepted to a degree, but overwhelmingly, we're definitely seeing that consumers want free content more than they want to avoid ads. And that if they're downloading free content, if they're consuming free media, then there's generally, platforms like radio and TV that set the stall out before us that will encourage users to accept that free content comes with ad support, and the ad supported framework is accepted. But I guess, each time we download an app, we reveal a little bit ourselves, and we reveal about whether we're prepared to make the trade-off between paying for content directly or paying indirectly for that content by agreeing to view ads. And that's a very revealing sort of consumer habit. But for the first time last year, we saw that the majority, over 90% of apps are now free. Free apps dominate the top grossing charts. You only need to look at them around the world and you'll see Heyday and Clash of Clans and Candy Crush and Farm Heroes Saga. They're all free. And then you go on to make in-app purchases. So generally, I made reference earlier to the size of the ad market, that everything is going free. We think that 90% will grow to 95, maybe 97%, with only a very small percentage of apps being premium around the world. And the average price on Android games is getting almost free. You can see on Android that it's 6 cents relative to the iPhone at 19. and obviously the iPad at 50 cents. But the average cost of Google Play versus iOS, there's obviously a clear bias. There's a clear bias towards free apps on Android. And generally, the Android users are far less likely to pay for content. Android is considered the mass market. It's considered an all-income level device. And I think for those that develop on the phone, for mobile, will know that, you know, monetizing Android is somewhat harder than iOS. Although Android has a much faster growth and is now over half of devices. So it's not a platform that we can ignore. Just a few more slides. So this is looking at a Cartesian scatter plot. Up the side is sessions per week, and along the bottom is retention rates. And so they're throwing out each of the games categories into 4 quadrants. For those of you who've seen this before or are quick to grasp this, you'll know that immediately if you're generating a high number of sessions a week and higher loyalty, you're in good business. You're in good shape. So quadrants on the right, 1 and 4, you're going to get high loyalty, high frequency in sessions. You'll generate high number of impressions if you want to monetize with advertising. You need to find the right balance of IAP and ads, and maybe only serving ads to those that don't make any in-app purchases. And building in mechanics which are critical to get the high frequency and return metrics. And you can see in there the sort of brain quiz, endless runners, bubble shooters, match 3, solitaire, and social turn-based games as well, which actually is further up the sessions per week. So quadrant 2, so top left, is where real intense usage happens, but retention is a struggle. So in that sector, there's the slots, casino, management sim games, strategy. And really, it's all about, you know, keeping the user excited, keeping the user retained, refreshing content, new content releases on a highly frequent basis, so that your updates keep people entertained, keep people coming back, and your in-app purchase moments are few and far between, and they're intense. So you've got to take advantage of that opportunity to generate in-app purchase opportunities pretty quick. Quadrant 3 is the hardest. Obviously, your retention is the weakest relative to other category games genres, and your sessions per week is much lower. In there are things like arcade, racing, card battle, role-playing games. So you need to look to maximize revenue early in the life cycle of a game. There's a finite window. You're only going to keep people for a short amount of time, and it's very difficult to find the right user. But you've got to tune your acquisition and targeting to make sure you're finding that type of user. Another way of being more scientific about acquisition is to use something like Flurry. Flurry estimates very accurately your users by age and by gender. For those that want to know how we do that, I can explain at a later date. And this is looking at top 3 Android games by audience as we see it. And you can really see some sort of fairly dramatic differences there. You know, between slots and casino, there's a dramatic difference in age range and in male to female. So across the horizontal axis is the percent that we see a female or likely to be female, and up the side you're getting older. So the older categories are solitaire, slots, and card battle. Those top 3 across the left. Where they're gender neutral is in slots, social turn-based, match 3, bubble, brain quiz. And where you're appealing to much younger audiences are in RPG, strategy, endless runner, and racing. So again, what we want you to try and understand is A, who you've designed for according to how we summarize it. And if you are a user of Flurry, I do really encourage you to go to the audience tab, toggle between first-party data and third-party data. So you'll look at Flurry Estimates. If you're not passing any first-party data in, you won't have any there. But if you go to Flurry Estimates, we immediately be able to estimate what we think the average age and gender of your game is. That really we hope helps to feed back into the design cycle. We also hope it takes the opinion off the table and lets data and insight drive your understanding of who we think are playing your games. And that then also in turn allows you to know your audience in terms of who you should try and acquire. So if you know that you're in the endless runner category, you know that really you've got to try and appeal to a much younger audience relative to something like social turn-based games. So again, that should feed into your user acquisition strategy. That should feed into your marketing strategy so that you really know who you're looking to acquire. Last couple of slides. This is relative ad yields on iOS versus Android, reflective in the differences on payments in iOS and Android. That eCPM, so that's the average yield per 1,000 ad impressions, is almost half Android than it is on iOS for rewarded videos, and it's around a third less on display. So again, challenges around monetizing Android. Last slide is where we're heading, which is programmatic buying. If you've heard of real-time bidding, what this allows you to do is offer up impressions into an exchange. Flurry has launched its own exchange called Flurry Marketplace. As an app developer with impressions and with users, you can join our Flurry Marketplace. We then put your impression into the exchange that a DSP, a demand-side platform, can bid each impression at a time. The difference that we make is that we append that impression with a data signal like age and gender and personas. Personas can be any number of interest categories based on the time they spend in the apps that we track. That might be an automotive fan, would be a sports enthusiast, a fashionista, or indeed a young mum. Again, I mentioned at the beginning about bringing brands to this market, and we know more about your users' audience profile than you do. We know more about what they do off your games, and so we can help bring that value, bring that data, bring that insight into the real-time bidding marketplace. So Flurry Marketplace launched about 5 months ago. It's growing fast. We have just under 3,000 developers in that marketplace and over 40 demand-side partners. So you'll see that grow extremely fast, and it's a whole new way of monetizing your audiences. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. There's a couple of questions that came in on our chat screen here during the presentation. First of which was, can I use Flurry service not only for analytics in my game, but to make advertisements in them? Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The SDK can house both your analytics and your advertising. So it's all part of the same SDK, so you don't need to add another one. The SDK will allow you to do analytics, will allow you to put ads inside your app. It will allow you to do user acquisition. It will also allow you to become part of our Flurry Marketplace too. You just need to, deploy the ad libraries and the ad support framework. So yeah, it's all part of the SDK.
Okay. Thanks. Let's see, we have a question that just came in from Dave Koda. Can Richard speak briefly on the percentage of apps and games that are built on iOS only but not on Android? Reason behind the question, they're trying to gauge the market opportunity for cross-platform development tool use, like Marmalade, and perhaps a breakdown of this percentage on a global basis would be helpful.
I think any major successful developer cannot afford to develop across multiple platforms. I think certainly 2 or 3 years ago, you would see a developer almost exclusively in one camp, and they might outsource it. So they're a big iOS developer, and so they outsource Android to a partner. I think that trend has definitely changed to using partners like Marmalade. Sorry, they're not sponsoring me to say that, but to really start to be a single developer thinking about multiple platform, multiple operating system from the same company, from the same team, and not outsourcing it. So I don't think I can think of any major successful developers that have only achieved that success on one or the other. The differences will be in a market I'm not so familiar about, which will be Asia. I'm sure there's a ton. If you look at something like Puzzle and Dragon, enormously successful out there. I'm sure there are a ton out there that are almost exclusively Android.
Right. All right. Another question just came in. What are the differences between Flurry and Emobi and Interactive? Or if you can talk a little bit about the standout differences for them.
Well, on the advertising side, we're all ad networks. We all come at it from a slightly different angle. As I explained at the beginning, we give away our SDK and our free analytics provision, which is incredibly useful for developers and is the world's leading and largest analytics provision. We do that, to indirectly gather a lot of data to make advertising more effective. Targeted advertising is way more effective than untargeted advertising. So we see that we've got a significant advantage because we just know so much more about your users than anyone else. And that's of huge value to both the games developers, if you allow competitive games developers to advertise to your users. But it's also very useful for brands like Procter & Gamble, and take their diapers or nappy ranges. They only want to reach the principal household buyer, call that the mum or the young mum. And we have profiled, tens and tens of million devices that characterized by their app behavior as being young mums. That allows one of the world's largest advertisers in Procter & Gamble or Unilever to really lean into the mobile ecosystem for the first time and say, wait a minute, I now can advertise in, match 3 shooters or in other genres, but not just do a run of app campaign, but I can actually use Flurry's data to only reach young mums. That's extremely interesting to me. And I'm now going to advertise in a way that I've not advertised before. So I would say the data is the difference between Flurry and InMobi. InMobi is more of a standard display network. Our ad network tends to focus on video. We do banners and interstitials as well. There is a question around the average CPM for video ads. And the answer to that is somewhere between $11 and $13 is the average CPM for video advertising. Do our ads serve in China? Yes, they do. We have app developers with Chinese users, and we serve to those. As long as the Chinese government are not on the call, which I doubt. They have tried to block Flurry quite a few times, but we've managed to get around it. I'm sure they understand that we track, a huge hundreds of millions of Chinese users with our Flurry Analytics. Maybe they'll block us effectively at some point in the future, but for now, we track more Chinese active users than anyone else on the planet. So, yes, we have huge insight into what's going on in China, and we do monetize Chinese users inside apps that developers are serving our ads in. Yes.
Thank you, Richard. It doesn't look like we have any other questions that have come in right now. If you do have any other questions, Richard's information is right here on the bottom of the slide. We will be circulating these slides to all of the attendees following the webinar. Thanks again so much for taking the time to join us. Again, if you have any follow-up questions, you can follow up with Richard, and his email is here, richard@flurry.com. Thanks again, Richard. Appreciate you taking the time to join us and share this great information. And we look forward to back again.